Well, good morning, everyone, and a huge welcome to you all to IMM Virtual 2021. It's great to have you here with us. Well, the wait is over. This is where IMM commences, and so I'm delighted to be speaking to our headline sponsor, Tourism Australia, one of the world's great tourism brands and a huge supporter of IMM down the years and across the world. And to talk through Australia's plans for welcoming back travel journalists just as soon as conditions allow, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Sally Cope, Tourism Australia's Regional General Manager, UK and Northern Europe. Sally, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Henry. Great to be here.
So from Sally today, we're going to get an overview of all the news from Australia to bring UK media up to date. And then we're going to go into a separate segment and we're going to look at the growing appeal of Indigenous tourism in Australia. And we're going to have an interview with the head of Tourism Australia's Discover Aboriginal Experiences program, Nicole Mitchell. So, Sally, it's been a year since Australia's borders were closed to non-citizens. Not long, we hope, until they open again. During this time, what has Tourism Australia been up to?
Well, what an extraordinary year. I was in fact in Adelaide at our Destination Australia conference last March when the World Health Organization declared it was a global pandemic. And it was within a week, I think, that the Australian government shut down the international borders really as an immediate control to contain the spread of coronavirus or coming into the country. We, as the National Tourism Board, had some very quick and serious thinking to undertake. Our remit is all about encouraging international travellers to come to the country. So we had to define a very clear strategy because we didn't know how long this would be happening. We knew it was very important to protect the investment in the brand internationally in our key markets around the world. So we decided up front that we would, for want of a better expression, keep the lights on. Yeah. And from a PR and media perspective, that is about really continuing with engaging stories and talking to media and letting people know what is happening in Australia. From a marketing perspective, we've had always on social media and content marketing and so on. Our international media hosting program, we've managed to keep going, but pretty much utilising stringers and friends that we have in Australia who can also help generate some of the stories out of the country. And it's been really, really heartening because the consumers have been really engaged with a lot of the content that's been produced in the last year. So it's been worth the effort.
Fantastic. And how is the domestic travel industry in Australia faring? Obviously, you've been immensely successful with containing coronavirus, and we hear great things about domestic tourism in Australia. Can you update us on that?
Well, at the same time as we were keeping the lights on offshore, we had to turn our attention to domestic tourism, which we would not normally engage with marketing to Australians in Australia. We launched a domestic campaign, Holiday Here this year. We've had several iterations of that throughout the year and it has been really successful. I learned yesterday that our domestic aviation capacity is now at 98% of what it was just before the travel restrictions came down for international travel. So that's really proving that Australians are moving around the country now, and that's been great. It's been a lifeline for our industry. The industry's been buoyed by the domestic travel, getting Australians to travel like international visitors and do the tours and experiences that are so popular in the international markets. But I have to say, the domestic market will not completely fill the gap of international visitors. So we are looking forward very much to getting international visitors back into the country.
You want us back, that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I understand to see this hot list and to hear all the news of new hotels and everything else coming on stream, there's a press tab at the website tourism.australia.com.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, it's out there. There's an elephant in the room. I have to ask you this: when do you think, Sally, that borders might open? And maybe a key part of that is, how is the vaccine rollout progressing?
The two are intrinsically linked. And I think we're all well aware that the Australian government has taken a really cautious approach around the containment as much as possible of the COVID pandemic. They've done, I mean, touch wood, an amazing job to date. We've got a quarantine regime, so everyone coming into the country at the moment has a compulsory 2 weeks hotel quarantine, and the arrival numbers are restricted to the capacity of that quarantine. I think as the vaccine rolls out, both internationally and domestically in Australia, there will be a growing confidence about relaxing that. And so therefore they are intrinsically linked. We don't have a timeline on that at the moment. All I can say is that whereas maybe a year ago we might have imagined a ta-da moment when all international travel restrictions were lifted simultaneously, I think now it's more likely to be an organic unfolding almost as various different travel bubbles start to open up and so on. And last month we had our first quarantine-free travel bubble open up between Australia and New Zealand, and that's tracking pretty well at the moment. So that's a good start, and I guess it's watch this space for where's next.
So Sally, there must be so much pent-up demand for Australia from UK travellers at the moment, people who had trips planned, maybe VFR, maybe weddings, maybe just that fantastic tour. What kind of travel do you expect to see once conditions allow? What are going to be the trends and patterns, Sally?
I think after a year of social restrictions and limitations on our movement, there's obviously the pent-up demand, and it's clear that there's unprecedented household savings. There's backed up annual leave as well, which is also feeding that pent-up demand. So I suspect that perhaps this experience will make people value travel a little bit more, want to go for longer, dive deeper into an itinerary or into a destination. And Australia has so much to offer. It's vast. There's a lot of diverse experience. There's plenty of elbow room. You can find yourself in beautiful natural locations with hardly anyone else around. You can do a road trip up the coastline and you're traveling in your own bubble per se. I think the management of the COVID pandemic has also potentially given people a sense of security around travelling around Australia as well, which is a nice extra layer to add on to the whole experience. But largely it's about reconnecting, either whether it's reconnecting with people or just reconnecting with nature and getting out.
Fantastic. And what I'm hearing is, if you've been saving during lockdown, it's got to be Australia. You've got to head to Australia.
Absolutely.
Lovely. So for the travel writer maybe who hasn't been and is planning a trip to Australia for the first time, Sally, what's your advice? How do you go about getting to the heart of Australia on your first tour?
Australia is a big country. If you've ever seen a map of Australia overlaid on a map of Europe, you get a sense of the size of the geography. It reaches from the UK to Turkey. So the first logical step would be to not try and cover it all at once. There's a lot of diversity of experience and landscape, and it's about honing in on a region or a type of travel that is of interest and doing it in small sections. Most UK visitors will probably go to 2 or 3 states on one trip, and we know that the repeat visitation from this market is up around the 70% mark. So we know that once British travellers have been there once, they tend to go back again and again. So my advice would be, choose a specific region or a type of travel and build from there.
So, Sally, what else do we expect to be the draw cards for Australia when travel resumes?
For first-time visitors, people tend to look at the icons and really look at travelling to those famous places in Australia that they may have heard so much about. So the gateway cities like Sydney and Melbourne are always very popular. Getting out into the outback, places like Uluru, which I've got in the background behind me, getting out into those wide open spaces, learning a little bit about Australia's Indigenous culture. That's really the heartbeat of the country when you get out there. And then also the splendour of the Great Barrier Reef. And a lot of people don't realise that the Daintree rainforest comes right up to the coastline where the Great Barrier Reef is. So it's two World Heritage National Parks side by side. I mean, that is, as far as an iconic itinerary to Australia, what has enormous appeal for a first-time visitor. But then we know so many Brits go back again and again, and they can explore deeper throughout the country. And there's so many touch points of interest, whether it's the wine regions right across the southern states or the walking trails. We've got many multi-day walking trails that will go through World Heritage listed national parks where no one's around, and we know that Brits love walking, so that will be really appealing. We also know that, I guess, today's conscious traveller is really looking for authentic experiences where there might be some learning or giving back as part of the experience. So we're really, at Tourism Australia, putting the spotlight on so much of the products and experiences around the country that are focused on sustainable travel, and whether that's seeing wildlife in the wild in their natural habitat or staying in accommodation, which is a really light touch footprint. It's that kind of travel which it has a feeling of goodness about it as well. I think there's a lot to choose from around the country.
So Sally, Australia must seem quite some distance away at the moment, but it's your home. And could you maybe tell our IMM media audience today about some of those places you so love and that I'm sure you would like to show to everyone in our audience?
Of course, I miss, my hometown is Sydney. So when I get back there, I'll be out on Sydney Harbour. Definitely the whole city glistens from the harbour. So that will be a big tick. I miss the colours of Australia. So getting into the outback and the red rock escarpments and the beautiful river gum trees and so on. So I'd need to get outback, whether it's Uluru or to the Flinders Ranges in South Australia, somewhere that really feels Australian, the landscape. I miss the sounds of the bush and the wildlife, the bird life and so on. So somewhere like, say, Kangaroo Island, where you get to see so many of the iconic Australian wildlife in the wild. That will definitely be on my bucket list. And probably sounds flippant, but very important, I miss the beautiful Australian wines, but in situ. So if I flew from the UK straight down to Perth, the first place I'd be going is Margaret River to have a nice cool glass of Chardonnay in one of the glorious vineyards down there, which are all surrounded by beautiful coastline and beaches. So there you go, there's a selection.
Fantastic, we'll all join you on that trip if that's Sally, Australia is a destination that's very familiar to many Brits, but I'm sure you'd say it's far from just a warm version of the UK. It really is radically different, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there's no doubting there's so many similarities between the people, which is why it feels so warm and friendly for Brits to come and visit. We've been friends for, generations, but there's also a lot to surprise people. And I think that is so much of the appeal. And we know from our research here in the UK that British people are really interested in the Indigenous culture of Australia. It's the oldest continuous living culture in the world. And there's just so many extraordinary experiences. People tend to think, having an Indigenous experience or an Aboriginal experience in Australia, you need to go to the outback. But these can be found in the cities and in the urban regions or out on the water on the Great Barrier Reef and so on. So that's actually why we thought it'd be a great idea to get Nicole Mitchell, my colleague who runs Discover Aboriginal Experiences, to come and talk to you, because she can tell you about the breadth and depth of these extraordinary Aboriginal owned and operated experiences around the country.
Lovely. Well, we'll hear from Nicole Mitchell now. And just as a taster of those Indigenous tours of Australia, just watch this little video.
To connect our mind, body, and soul to the land, we dance.
So Nicole, can you just kick off by telling us about the Discover Aboriginal Experiences program? Why was it created? How did it come about?
Yeah, sure, Henry. The collective, the Discover Aboriginal Experiences, it was really built on the work that we've been doing at Tourism Australia. We have the world's oldest living culture in the world. It's something that we can hang our hat on. And also, we really wanted to promote those authentic Aboriginal guided experiences. We've built the collective to 45 businesses that are now offering 185 different experiences in Australia. And I guess importantly, that means our fabulous storytellers and guides can be on country, and we're a single voice and a marketing engine for them, for their businesses as well.
So Nicole, for our audience of travel writers watching on today, let's imagine they haven't so far written about Indigenous tourism cultures. It's a vast country, there are myriad opportunities. What would you suggest they do? Where do they start?
I think the best thing is not to think about it as a silo experience to other experiences. The experiences that we've got in the collective, you can be going to the Great Barrier Reef with an Indigenous guide, you can be kayaking in Nitmilutch Gorge in the Northern Territory. It's really about whatever destination you're going to on your media visit, making sure you include an Indigenous experience. It will really bring that landscape to life. You'll have a deeper connection with the country, whilst you're doing all the fantastic regular experiences that you might be doing in Australia.
So Nicole, from your experience in your role, how does tourism in Australia help support Australia's Indigenous communities and their cultures?
Well, Indigenous tourism is a really positive driver for change and the sustainability of culture. One of the elders or one of the guides once told me, we have to share our culture to keep our culture. And tourism is a fantastic way to do this. You know, you're supporting cultural, economic and social opportunities, and it's keeping our culture alive. So I think as Indigenous tourism continues to grow globally, we're going to see how important it is for helping communities. And we're seeing that in Australia right now.
So with journalists keen to look at Indigenous tourism, they're wanting an authentic experience to write about, but equally, Nicole, are there any watch outs or tips that you would suggest to them to make sure that they're really supporting the authentic Aboriginal businesses and the communities?
I think the most important thing is that a good start is to book with a Discover Aboriginal Experiences member. All the businesses in this collective have achieved a certain criteria to be in this collective that's based on authenticity, quality, sharing of culture. And importantly, all the businesses are either Aboriginal owned, or if they're not Aboriginal owned, the funding is going back to the Aboriginal community. And I think the biggest sign of respect is making sure you've got an Aboriginal guide who's talking to you about culture. It's the person who owns that story, who is telling that story. All of the experiences that are Aboriginal guided, they're absolutely lovely people, humorous people, and often when we go on holidays, it's who we meet that stays with us the most. And I think that that's what you'll find. So number one call out, always book with an Aboriginal guide.
Nicole, have you got any new members or new experiences this year that you're really excited about joining your program?
Yeah, well, how long have we got, Henry? There's so many new fabulous products, but I'll limit it to a few. I think during this period that we've had, it's been a great time for development and diversification of experiences. Over the last couple of years even, we've gone from 135 experiences to 185. So that's phenomenal growth. But a couple of standouts for me is that, looking at the diversification within members. So we've got Go Cultural Tours, have now got a tour on Rottnest Island. Or there's a lot of interest in women's tours, which is Lirrawee up in Arnhem Land, that's selling out so fast. We've got 4 new members in the collective this year, which is great considering the tourism times that we're in. And we've got Kingfisher Tours, which is a fantastic experience in the Kimberley in the true wilderness area. Oregon Coaster Creek, which is in Cygnet Bay, which is up in the Dampier Peninsula, and that's associated with the pearl farming. And then we've got Wanjani Adventure Tours in Coffs Harbour, where you can jump on the back of a paddleboard and learn about culture, or Bundy Cultural Tours, where you can even do a tour on a motorcycle out at Wagga Wagga. So there's so many different experiences that are continually evolving and changing. I think another really good call out one is Jarramali Rock Art Tours, which is up in the Laura region, so in far north Queensland near Cooktown. The Quincum Rock Art area is amazing. It's not well known. That product hasn't had a lot of exposure in the media, but every single person who goes on that thinks it's absolutely outstanding. And another one perhaps is Koori Heritage Trust in Melbourne, a walking tour around Melbourne and seeing it from a completely different perspective. But there's many experiences that are coming on the radar. We continually keep you updated via Trav Media. And we've also just launched, hot off the press this week, our latest Discover Aboriginal Experiences media kit, which we've got, I think, over 50 different story ideas and some deep dives into product, and also meeting some of the storytellers themselves.
So Nicole, imagine you're a travel writer flying into Australia and planning to write a feature about Indigenous tourism. Can you give us a typical sort of exciting itinerary that they might be looking at?
There's so many exciting itineraries that you could have, depending on where you arrive, but maybe let's start at Sydney. And if you're in Sydney and you're arriving, flight's normally early in the morning. The best thing to do is get out and have a walk. And the best person to do that is with Margaret Campbell from Dreamtime Southern Cross. She shows you this perspective of a modern day Sydney with a historic ancient perspective. And then maybe you'll head up to Uluru and with Mariku Art, have an amazing dot painting art workshop. Perhaps head to Cairns, far north Queensland. We have a fantastic trip to the Great Barrier Reef with an Indigenous guide with Dreamtime Dive and Snorkel. And your experience starts from the moment you hop on the boat, which I think is just outstanding. Or you might like to go up to the Jane Tree. You could pop across to Darwin, Kakadu National Park, really bring that landscape to life with an Indigenous guide. Then maybe head over to Perth in Western Australia. We've got a great new experience out on Rottnest Island, and there is such a history on Rottnest Island, an Indigenous history that's important to be told. And not to forget fantastic Tasmania, we've got a great 3-night, 4-day walk with Wookalina Walk. If you're heading to Melbourne, we've got a new experience with Koori Heritage Trust, which is a walking tour around Melbourne that, for me, who's been to Melbourne so many times, I saw the area completely from a different perspective. Or in South Australia, you might want to head to Wilpena Pound, and what an amazing site and area that is. And there's tours you can do from an hour to a full day. And I think that's the thing about Discover Aboriginal Experiences. We've got everything for every budget, but also for every time. So if you're a journalist coming out and you've got an hour, or if you're lucky enough to have 5 days and want to head up to East Arnhem Land to Lirrawee, there's something that we can weave into your program.
Sounds mighty tempting. Well, thanks so much to Nicole for those fascinating insights. And thank you also to Sally Coe for joining us today. It's been absolutely wonderful listening to her. And Sally, thank you so much to you for all the support that Tourism Australia brings to IMM. We massively appreciate it.
Thank you, Henry. And it's been a great opportunity. We are thrilled to be sponsoring IMM again this year. Australia can't wait to welcome everybody back. As we've already said, there's so much that we know will be appealing to visitors who want to start travelling again. The wide open spaces, reconnecting with nature, reconnecting with friends and family. And importantly, for our media partners around the UK, we can't wait to start bringing people back down as well. So you can help us share our stories when travel recommences.
Thank you very much indeed, Sally. It's been great having you here.
Australia. Whoever came up with this place deserves a real pat on the back. I mean, think about it. There are birds who can laugh, mammals who can sing, and walls that can tell stories. There are cities that start where the waves end, and 26 million weird and wonderful characters. This is a place that took a look at the rule book and said, nah, here's a platypus. And you know the most incredible thing of all? While we wait for you, the best bits are only getting better. Imagine that.